2 years ago, I was drowning in love. Today, I'm just drowning. His name was Daniel. He wasn't just any man. He was the man. The kind who walks into your life like he was always meant to be there, fitting into your world so perfectly, so effortlessly, that you never question it. I met him at a coffee shop, back when the city still felt foreign, when loneliness curled around me like a second skin. I was new, lost in the chaos of unfamiliar streets and unfamiliar faces, and then there he was, warm, confident, smiling at me like he already knew me. We talked for hours that day, and when we said goodbye, I already knew. This wasn't the end. I should have known better. He was everything I had ever wanted. Thoughtful, charming, the kind of man who made you feel like you were the only woman in the world. The way he looked at me, like I was something rare, something precious, made my head spin. Our love wasn't just passionate. It was intoxicating. Late-night conversations that blurred into morning. Flowers for no reason. Long walks with his fingers tangled in mine. Good morning texts before I even opened my eyes. When he told me he loved me, I believed him. When he said he wanted forever, I felt it. And when he got down on one knee in my tiny apartment, holding a velvet box with shaking hands, I didn't hesitate. Yes, I had never been so sure of anything in my life. Then one day, he was gone. No warning, no fight, no slow unraveling, just gone. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts sat unread. I thought something had happened to him. A car accident, a misunderstanding, something, anything, that could explain why the man I was supposed to marry had vanished into thin air. But then I called his office. He resigned last week, they told me. I went to his apartment, empty. It was as if he had never existed. I searched for answers, called mutual friends, knocked on doors. Every lead crumbled in my hands, and then the final blow. He had blocked me, phone, social media, even my email. That's when I knew. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't something that just happened. Daniel had erased me. But why? I spent weeks replaying everything, every conversation, every moment, searching for the moment I must have missed, the one where he decided I was disposable. But there was nothing. No fights, no coldness, no sign that he had been slipping away. One day he loved me. The next, he didn't exist. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped being a person. And just when I thought life couldn't take anything else from me, I found out. I was pregnant. The test sat on my bathroom counter mocking me. 2 pink lines that should have meant joy, hope, a future. But instead, they meant terror. I was alone, in a city where I had no family, no safety net, and the father of my child had disappeared without a trace. I tried to stay strong, told myself I could do this, that I would do this. But stress is a poison. It seeps into your bones, rots you from the inside. I stopped eating properly, stopped taking care of myself. And one night, the pain hit. It started slow, just a dull ache. Then it became unbearable. I collapsed onto the cold tile of my bathroom floor, clutching my stomach, screaming through sobs. My fingers fumbled for my phone. Dialed 911. By the time I got to the hospital, it was already over. I lost my baby, and I lost whatever was left of myself that night. Lying in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about all the dreams I had built with Daniel, the life we were supposed to have, the child who never even got a chance to exist. And for what? Because I trusted the wrong person? Because I was stupid enough to believe in love? The doctor told me it wasn't my fault, that grief and trauma can do terrible things to the body, that I needed to rest, to heal. But how do you heal when there's nothing left inside of you? I left the hospital with nothing but a hollow ache in my chest. I didn't just lose my baby. I lost the last part of me that believed in something good. I don't know how I survived those first few weeks. Time became meaningless. Day and night blurred together. The world outside my apartment kept moving. Cars honked, people laughed, life continued. But I wasn't part of it. I was trapped in a loop of grief and silence. The hospital had given me a pamphlet on coping with loss. I threw it away the second I got home. What was the point? No amount of words could bring my baby back. No therapy session would make Daniel reappear with an explanation. He was gone, my child was gone, and I was nothing. I spent days in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like a ghost inside my own body. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I didn't. Mostly I felt empty. The worst part wasn't the pain, it was the silence. I kept expecting my phone to buzz, kept waiting for Daniel to come back, to call, to explain. Some nights I swore I heard my phone vibrate only to wake up and see nothing but missed calls from my boss, from the few friends I had left. Days turned into weeks. And still, nothing. Daniel wasn't coming back. One night I finally forced myself outside. I don't know why. Maybe I thought fresh air would help. Maybe I was desperate to feel something, anything other than this crushing, endless grief. I walked for hours, past restaurants filled with laughter, past couples holding hands, past a world that had moved on while I was still drowning. Then, without thinking, I wandered into a grocery store. It was normal, mundane, a place where people lived their lives, without knowing what it felt like to lose everything. And then I saw her, a woman in the aisle, visibly pregnant. Her partner stood beside her, his hands resting gently on her stomach as they laughed about baby names. I felt my legs buckle beneath me. The universe had a sick sense of humor. I turned and ran, made it outside, stumbled onto a bench. I gasped for air, but none came. My hands trembled, my stomach twisted. I wanted to scream, to claw at the world and demand why. Why her? Why not me? I had loved Daniel. I had wanted this baby. I had done everything right, so why was I the one left with nothing? Shame flooded me, but I couldn't stop the jealousy, the rage, the unbearable ache of knowing my child was gone while someone else got to keep theirs. That was the night the dark thoughts started creeping in. Grief changes your mind. It twists. Reality whispers that things will never get better. It tells you that joy is a distant memory, that existing is pointless when everything you love is gone. And I started to believe it. I stopped answering texts, stopped going to work, stopped pretending I was still part of the living. My apartment became a prison, and I let myself rot inside it. And then, one night, I made a decision. I didn't want to be here anymore. I wrote a note. Short. Simple. An apology for not being strong enough. And just as I was about to take that final step, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, some last flicker of life, picked it up. It was Sarah. She had been my closest friend before Daniel. She had been trying to reach me for weeks, leaving messages, stopping by my apartment, slipping notes under my door. I had ignored her every time, but now, hearing her voice, something inside me cracked. "Come outside," she said. "I'm here." And, for some reason, I did. Sarah was standing by her car, eyes filled with worry and relief. The second she saw me, she pulled me into a hug, and I shattered. For the first time in weeks, I really cried, not the silent, empty sobs I had been drowning in. This was gut-wrenching, body-breaking grief. Sarah didn't let go. She just held me, letting me fall apart in her arms. That night she took me to her apartment, made me tea, sat with me until I fell asleep. She didn't push me to talk. She didn't try to fix me. She just stayed. And that, more than anything, saved me. The next morning she convinced me to see a therapist. I resisted. But part of me knew, if I stayed in that apartment alone with my thoughts, I wouldn't survive this. So I went. I sat in the chair, silent, refusing to speak. Minutes passed. Finally, when I did find my voice, it came out as a whisper. "I don't want to be here anymore." The therapist didn't look shocked, didn't flinch. She just nodded and said, "I'm really glad you told me that. It was the first time in months that I felt like someone saw me." The road to recovery wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to quit, days I felt like I wasn't getting better. But little by little, I started existing again. I talked about the baby, about Daniel, about the rage I felt, the love I had lost, the hate I couldn't let go of. Sarah stayed by my side. She made sure I ate. She made sure I wasn't alone, and for the first time in months, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. I wasn't okay, but I was still here. And maybe, for now, that was enough. Months passed. Grief doesn't fade, it just changes shape. Some days, it was a dull ache, a whisper of pain I could ignore. Other days, it was a tidal wave, dragging me under before I even had the strength to fight back. But I was trying. Therapy. Small steps forward. The occasional setback, Sarah stayed. My therapist stayed. And slowly I began existing again. Not living, just existing. And then just when I thought I was beginning to heal, the universe ripped my wounds open all over again. It was an ordinary afternoon. A rare day where I felt strong enough to run errands, to step outside without the weight of grief pressing on my chest. I was at the pharmacy, picking up a refill for my anxiety meds, when I saw him. Daniel. My body froze. For a moment I thought I was hallucinating, that my mind, still bruised and battered, was playing some sick trick on me. But no. He was real, and he wasn't alone. She was standing beside him, tall, beautiful. The kind of effortlessly elegant woman who belonged in a world I had never been part of. They were laughing. And then, the final blow. 3 children ran up to them, giggling, tugging on Daniel's hands. A little girl, no older than 4, waddled behind them, reaching for him. He scooped her up with practiced ease, kissing the top of her head, smiling like the happiest man alive. And just like that, the world tilted on its axis. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Daniel had a family. A real family, not just a girlfriend, not just a rebound, a wife, children, a whole life that had never included me. A strangled sound escaped me, some small, wounded noise that I barely recognized as my own, and then, as if sensing it, he turned. Our eyes met. For a split second I saw it. Shock, pure, undiluted shock. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. His expression hardened, without a word, without hesitation. He turned away. He whispered something to his wife, took her hand, and walked away, like I was nothing, like I had never been. Anything? I stumbled out of the store, barely making it to a bench before my legs gave out. My stomach twisted violently. My pulse pounded in my ears. It all made sense now, the sudden disappearance, the erased calls, the vanishing act. He hadn't left me. He had gone back to his real life. I had been nothing but a distraction, a secret, a stupid, naive idiot who had believed in a man who never even existed. Oh God, had I been his mistress? Had I been the other woman all along? I felt sick. I wanted to scream, to run back inside, to grab him, to demand answers. But what would be the point? I had my answer. Daniel wasn't some tragic lost love. He was a liar, a coward, a cheater. And I had wasted 2 years of my life loving a man who had never even been real. That night, I drank for the first time in months. Sarah found me on the floor of my apartment, an empty bottle beside me, my face streaked with tears. She didn't yell, didn't scold me. She just sat beside me and waited. And when I finally spoke, my voice was barely a whisper. I saw him. Sarah tensed. Daniel? I nodded. I told her everything. The wife, the kids. The way he had looked at me and walked away like I was nothing. I expected her to tell me I had dodged a bullet, that he was a piece of garbage, that I was better off without him. But instead she asked, "Do you want to confront him?" I blinked at her. "I can find out where he lives," she continued, her voice gentle but firm. "If you need closure, if you need to look him in the face and say everything you never got to say, I'll help you." I swallowed hard. "What's the point?" "He doesn't care." Sarah's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe not," she said. "But maybe this isn't about him anymore. Maybe this is about you." For the first time in months, something inside me stirred. A spark of anger. A flicker of something that wasn't just pain. I wasn't sure if confronting him would change anything. But suddenly, I knew one thing for certain. I needed to see him, again. The next day, Sarah and I drove to the address she had found. It was in a perfect suburban neighborhood. Manicured lawns, white picket fences. Daniel's house, his real life. We parked across the street. My heart pounded. My hands shook in my lap, and then, the front door opened, Daniel stepped out, dressed in business casual. Phone to his ear, looking, every bit like the polished family man he had pretended not to be. My stomach clenched. A few seconds later his wife came out, holding their youngest child on her hip. I had to fight the urge to throw up. This was it. The truth I had been too blind to see. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Are you ready?" I wasn't, but I was going to do it anyway. I stepped out of the car before I could change my mind. Sarah stayed behind, watching me with a mixture of worry and determination. Daniel hadn't seen me yet. He was still on the phone, smiling, laughing at something. Laughing. I felt my stomach churn. How many nights had I replayed the sound of his laugh in my head, aching for it? How many times had I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, he had loved me too, and yet here he was, living his perfect little life, like I had never existed, like he hadn't destroyed me. Rage surged through my veins. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was moving. Daniel turned just as I reached him. The second he saw me, his entire body tensed. For a split second I saw it. Panic. Then, just as quickly he masked it. His face went cold. Expression unreadable. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. What is she doing here? How much does she know? Can I talk my way out of this? I answered all of his unspoken questions with one sentence. 2 years. Daniel? His face went pale. Emily? 2 years, I repeated, my voice shaking with rage. 2 years of my life that you stole. And for what? For this? I gestured toward his house. His real life. His wife. His children. His lies. I expected him to stammer, to deny, to panic, but instead his jaw clenched. You need to leave, he muttered under his breath. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh, I need to leave? That's funny, because I spent the last year waiting for you to come back. To explain. But you didn't. You just... My voice cracked. Disappeared. He glanced around, checking for nosy neighbors. Of course, that's what mattered to him. Not me. Not my pain. Just the possibility of someone seeing the truth. Emily, this isn't the place. I took a step closer, my blood boiling. Then where, Daniel? When? Because I've been screaming into the void for months, waiting for an answer that never came. So tell me, did I ever mean anything to you? Something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt. Not remorse. Annoyance. You need to stop this, he said, his voice clipped. It's over. It's done. Move on. Move on. Move on, like it had been nothing, like I hadn't spent 2 years loving him, like I hadn't lost our child. The world tilted, my vision blurred. And then, before I even realized what I was doing, I whispered, I was pregnant. His reaction was instant. His breath hitched. His face lost all color. For the first time, I had the power. No! His voice was barely a breath. I nodded. Yes. I watched the words sink into him. Watched him process the weight of what he had done. His hands curled into fists at his sides. You're lying. A humorless laugh escaped my lips. Oh, trust me, I wish I was. I swallowed, the memory of the miscarriage slashing through me like a blade. I carried your child, Daniel. And while you were playing happy family over here, I was in a hospital, losing our baby. Alone. His jaw clenched. His entire body went rigid. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something real. Something like regret. But then, just as quickly it was gone, and the words that left his mouth shattered whatever was left of me. Well, I guess that's a good thing. The world stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. What? Did you just say? My voice didn't even sound like mine. Daniel exhaled sharply, like I was the one inconveniencing him. This would have ruined everything, he muttered. My life. My family. You were a mistake, Emily. A mistake. A mistake. The air in my lungs turned to knives. The baby I had lost, the child I had mourned, the one I had wanted, was just an inconvenience to him. I think I laughed then, or maybe I cried. Maybe both. But it didn't matter, because in that moment I knew. Daniel never loved me. Daniel never cared. He had erased me from his life because I was never meant to be in it. He opened his mouth to say something else. I didn't. Let him. I turned on my heel and walked away. Sarah was already waiting in the car, her expression tight with fury. She didn't say anything, just unlocked the door and let me in. The second we pulled away, I let out a sob so raw, so guttural, that it felt like it had been lodged inside me for an eternity. Sarah gripped the wheel, knuckles white. That bastard, she muttered under her breath. But I didn't respond. Because for the first time since Daniel left, I wasn't crying for him. I was crying for me. For the girl who had been stupid enough to believe in love. For the woman who had carried a child that would never be born. For the years I had lost on a man who had never even been real. I cried until my body had nothing left. And then finally I whispered, I want to be done with him. Sarah nodded. You will be. And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed her. In the days after my confrontation with Daniel, I felt like I was sleepwalking through my own life. I had spent so long believing that if I ever saw him again, if I ever got the truth, I'd finally be able to move on. But now that it had happened, I felt nothing. No relief. No closure. Just a hollow, gaping void where my heart used to be. Sarah tried to help. She stayed with me every night, forcing me to eat, making sure I didn't spiral. but she couldn't fix the fundamental truth I was now forced to live with. I had wasted 2 years of my life on a lie, and worse, I had lost my child for nothing. I had spent months blaming myself, mourning Daniel, believing I had done something wrong. But he hadn't left because of me. He had left because he had never been mine to begin with. I was just a secret, a distraction, a mistake. And knowing that, it broke me in a way I didn't think was possible. I started drinking again. Sarah noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You're punishing yourself," she said one night, watching me pour another glass of whiskey. I didn't argue. Because she was right. I wasn't drinking because I missed Daniel. I wasn't drinking because I wanted him back. I was drinking because I hated myself for ever loving him in the first place. I had been stupid, gullible, pathetic. And that kind of shame, the kind that settles into your bones and refuses to leave, can eat you alive, so I let it. I let the alcohol numb the pain. I let the days pass in a blur, drowning in self-loathing and regret. Until one night Sarah found me standing on the edge of my apartment balcony, staring down at the street below. I wasn't planning anything. Not really, but I wasn't not planning anything either. "Emily." Sarah's voice was soft but firm. "Come inside." I didn't move. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I just felt done. "Emily." She took a step closer. "Look at me." I did, and that's when I saw it. The fear in her eyes, the way her hands trembled at her sides. The realization that she thought, no, she knew, that if she had arrived even a minute later, I might not have been there at all. Something inside me snapped. Suddenly, I was sobbing. Sarah pulled me into her arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. "You're going to be okay." But I didn't believe her. Not yet. The next morning, Sarah drove me to my therapist's office. I didn't argue. I didn't fight her. I just went. And for the first time, I didn't just sit there, pretending to listen. I talked. I told my therapist everything, about Daniel, about the baby, about how much I hated him, about how much I hated myself. And then finally, I said the words that had been rotting inside me for months. "I don't know how to live with this." She didn't react. She didn't flinch. She just nodded. And then she said something I will never forget. "You don't have to know how to live with it yet. You just have to live." That night, I poured every last drop of alcohol down the drain. It wasn't a miracle fix. It didn't magically erase the pain, but it was a start. The weeks that followed were slow, agonizing, but I kept going. I went to therapy twice a week. I started exercising again. I even picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years, letting the emotions I couldn't verbalize spill onto the canvas. And then one day, Sarah handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, eyeing it suspiciously. She smirked. "Just open it." I did. Inside was a plane ticket. "A vacation?" I blinked at her. "Are you insane? You need to get out of here," she said simply. "Even if it's just for a week." I hesitated. The thought of going anywhere felt impossible. I was barely holding myself together as it was, but Sarah knew me too well. "Emily," she said, voice softer now. "You deserve more than this. You deserve happiness. Even if you don't believe that yet." I stared at the ticket for a long time, and then, for the first time in months, I let myself hope. Before I left for the trip, I did one last thing. I wrote Daniel a letter. Not to send, not to give to him, but for me. And in that letter, I let out everything I had held inside for so long. "Daniel, you don't get to win. You don't get to be the reason I stopped living. I loved you. I loved you with everything I had. And you destroyed me, but I survived you. And that is something you will have to live with for the rest of your life. Goodbye." I folded the letter, set it on my bedside table, and left for the airport. For the first time in 2 years, I felt free. I didn't know what to expect when I boarded the plane. Maybe I thought the change of scenery would erase everything. Maybe I thought I would wake up in a new place and feel like a brand new person, unburdened by the ghosts of my past. But grief doesn't work like that. Pain doesn't vanish just because you land somewhere with a beach. I spent the first 2 days of my trip feeling just as broken as before, but then something shifted. It wasn't a big moment, no epiphany, no grand realization. It was small. I was sitting on the shore, watching the waves crash against the sand, when I noticed it. I was breathing, really breathing. The weight in my chest wasn't as suffocating. The ache in my bones wasn't as sharp. For the first time since Daniel walked out of my life, I felt like I had space. Space to exist. Space to be. And that was when I knew I was going to survive this. When I returned home, nothing was magically fixed. There were still bad days. Still nights when the what-ifs crept in. Still moments where I felt the ghost of Daniel's presence, where my body remembered a love that had never been real. But the difference was, I wasn't drowning anymore. I was swimming. I cut my hair, a stupid cliché thing, but it felt like shedding an old version of myself. The girl who had been blind. The girl who had trusted the wrong man. I started painting again. The first thing I painted was a single empty crib, sitting in the middle of a dark room, a beam of soft light shining down on it. It was my grief, my loss, my silent goodbye to the child I never got to hold. Sarah cried when she saw it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I didn't respond. I just nodded because for the first time I felt heard. I hadn't planned on ever seeing Daniel again. But life has a funny way of throwing things in your face when you least expect it. It happened at a cafe. I was sitting by the window, sketching absent-mindedly in my journal, when I heard his voice. I froze. And then I turned. There he was, Daniel. Standing in line, waiting for his coffee, scrolling through his phone like nothing in the world could touch him. Like he hadn't ruined me, like he hadn't walked away from me without a second thought. And for a brief moment, I felt the familiar pull of anger. The urge to march up to him, to scream, to make him feel even a fraction of what he had put me through. But then, I let it go because I realized something. I didn't care anymore. Daniel wasn't a villain. He wasn't a monster. He was nothing, just a man. A man who had lied. A man who had cheated. A man who had made me question my worth. But still, just a man, and I was so much more than the pain he had left behind. So I turned back to my journal, took a deep breath, and let him disappear from my world. For good. A year has passed since then. I won't pretend that everything is perfect. There are still days when I think about the baby I lost. Still nights where the ghost of my past tries to pull me under, but I'm okay. Really, truly okay. I got a new job. I moved into a new apartment. And one night, at an art gallery, I met someone. His name is Alex. He's kind, funny. The kind of person who makes you feel safe. I don't know what we are yet. I don't know if I'm ready to open my heart again. But for the first time in a long time, I'm willing to try, because I finally understand something. Daniel didn't break me. I was never broken to begin with. I was just learning how to heal. Oh, anyone reading this who has been in my shoes, who has been lied to, betrayed, made to feel like they were worthless. You will survive. You will heal. And one day, you will wake up and realize that the person who hurt you is just a shadow of a past life. You no longer live, because they don't get to win. We do, because we survive. And survival, that's the greatest revenge. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought, or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.